Hey guys, Infidel 1258 here. Today I want to get into another question from the audience, and this is a response or a rebuttal to a recent video where I addressed, let's say, criticism around how DEC has moved far above peg and then way below peg, and then the recent efforts that Splinterlands has made to institute a consistency at that peg value. And some people, especially newer people who maybe didn't understand what DEC was supposed to be, are really concerned and maybe even stressed about how they perhaps invested in that at a time when it was far higher, and now they feel as though the new developments have really handcuffed that investment and made it really unlikely that it should reach new highs again. So I think it's a really important topic because it speaks to some of our newer audience who possibly don't fully understand the history of DEC, but also to anyone who's new and thinking about, well, DEC made it to 2 cents before. Maybe if I buy it now below peg, it's going to reach, like other cryptocurrencies, extend into new highs at some point, and that could be an exciting ride to be along. So let's talk about it a bit more today. And there's a comment that I specifically want to address. It's a great comment. Mike Castagna said, while I understand your viewpoint, and that's me, I did a video, DEC peg killed Splinterlands. And I responded to this topic initially there. The conversation there was generally speaking about the idea that they have now instituted new means by which they will restore DEC to peg, and that really has become a ceiling that the audience and the commenter was convinced would be effective, and therefore was disappointed because he wants his DEC to reach new all-time highs at some point. And so I kind of said that's never been what DEC was for. DEC has always been a stable coin, and we should understand that what it's good at and what it's not good at, essentially. And why it's so important that it be a stable coin also, I said in the video. And then Mike comes in and he says, this is a great comment, Mike, first of all, thank you. And he raises some concerns that I really think are going to be important. So I hope you stick around for the rest of this, guys, especially if you're new, but even if you're not, because this is something we as a community need to properly understand so that we are rowing in the same direction as the game develops. So Mike goes on, he says, while I understand your viewpoint, I don't think it's fair. You are putting everything on the buyer. And hey, I fully understand, caveat emptor. However, this is a game managed by developers that, unlike many aspiring new players, fully understand the economics. If DEC was also supposed to be a peg, then the developer should bear a great deal of scrutiny and responsibility for having a mechanism to enter the game that was, frankly, raping new players. I just want to pause there because I want to make sure I'm tracking the implications of what you're getting at. I'm not sure you're talking about how DEC, they're supposed to fully understand the economy, the developers are, and if they wanted DEC to be a peg, they should have done what was necessary to make it be a peg, and new players don't necessarily understand all of that. And if DEC was also supposed to be a peg, yeah, it was, they should bear scrutiny and responsibility. I think they do, and they have. They talked about when it broke peg regularly. They would say things like, wow, this is an unintended consequence. They said in different words, they would say this is an unintended consequence of the SPS airdrop and how we attributed airdrop points to each individual DEC. And we did that with the best of intentions, but clearly we went too far because it's created this incentive to hold crazy amounts of DEC, which is affecting the peg. And they were clear about that in a number of different town halls. But at that point, they also said, look, we've done it. We can't now cut the airdrop points in half because that would be an intentional recorrection that would affect many people, just as many people as the original unintentional, let's say, decision, right? They didn't intend for DEC to be so aggressively desired for the SPS airdrop. They didn't really see that through properly. That was a misstep. But then to make another intentional alteration that would be perceived by some people as another misstep. To fix one misstep with another misstep is not going to be a desirable plan. So they didn't change the DEC airdrop points, and so that continued to be a thing that broke the DEC peg. I don't know where you get that from. This sounds harsh, but your reasoning suggests that the developers knew this, actually planned this. They did plan it to be a peg, advertise the game to get new players. Yeah, they definitely advertised the game to get new players and allowed them to pay usurious rates, that like high rates for when they knew that DEC was utterly overvalued. Well, when you say allowed them to pay, you know, really high rates for the DEC that was quote unquote overvalued, you're denying the fact that there's a marketplace that is free. So there's, you know, John sells to Jane, and Jane sells to Jim, and Dwayne sells to Mike, and Mike and Dwayne decide what Mike and Dwayne want to pay. Has nothing to do with Splinterlands. And so the idea that the market got away from Splinterlands has really nothing. Splinterlands has no control over what the market does. But they have influence on obviously on the desirability of holding DEC, and they did so through offering SPS airdrops. So in one sense, they created the excitement around DEC. You're right. And that was a misstep. I've said that, and they've said that in different words. But there wasn't a way to correct it once you made that misstep, because you already now had tens of thousands of people rushing to buy DEC and causing this parabolic move in DEC. So if you corrected the problem by cutting the airdrop points of DEC at that moment, you'd be screwing, just absolutely cutting, you know what I mean? Like taking the floor out from underneath those people that rushed out to take advantage of an angle that Splinterlands didn't see until that moment. And so they were like, this wasn't ideal, but it is what it is now. We need to let it go play its course. And they regularly talked about how long the airdrop was going to go on for. They talked about this issue and how it got away from them. They talked about how DEC is supposed to be a stable coin, and people who cover the community and the topic, like myself, were very clear too. Like, this is not supposed to be the way it is. It will return. And yet there was dissenting voices then still in the comment section saying things like, you don't know what you're talking about. It's going to, even higher, and so on and so forth. So the market does what the market does. Yes, Splinterlands has an impact on that, but they don't always understand. There are sometimes unintended consequences for the decisions that they're going to implement that cannot be foreseen, even though they are really smart. And I think earnest and what's the word? Scrupulous about how they approach these sorts of economic decisions. No humans are, we're all fallible, so we're all going to make mistakes, and therefore it strikes me that, we are maybe putting a higher burden on them because they are developers, but they're just people. And then I would say, when you talk about that they advertised the game to new players, of course they did, and then new players would have been admittedly confused about this issue. I'll grant you that. But they did what they could to inform and educate, even so far as to change how credits were purchased. There was if you were buying credits with DEC, how did it work? There was I'm pretty sure you could buy credits. How did it work? Yeah, so I'm pretty sure you used to be able to buy credits with dark energy crystals. And if you wanted to do that, you would be spending 1,000 DEC for $1, but 1,000 DEC was worth way more than a US dollar because of the exchange rate. But see, you have a market value. That's the US dollar exchange rate. That's the free market value was way over 1,000 equals $1. It was like 100 equals $2. That's how disconnected it was. The market said one thing and Splinterland said another thing. And some people were accidentally making that trade. They didn't really recognize, like you say, there was a lack of education, maybe a lack of proper signage or, in-game clarity. And they didn't necessarily know. So they were making that trade. And then the game, it was brought up in a separate town hall, and at some point someone said, like, this is happening, can we maybe put up a sign? And there actually got to be a place where there was signs. And the same was happening with potions, by the way. When you went into shop and you went to buy potions, you might have bought like one of these is supposed to be 38 dark energy crystals, one legendary potion, 38 dark energy crystals. But it was like, the way that, again, the price point Splinterlands was offering for DEC was so much disconnected from the marketplace reality that this was a bad idea. And so people had to tell one another in Splinterlands YouTube videos or in, you know, the town hall. We had to say, like, guys, use credits because that's a stable token that is going to equal the accurate price. But the DEC is too broken now and it's too far above its peg that it's not going to work in that way. And so there was tons of, I guess the point is that there were tons of complications around what happened. And some of it was, you know, unforeseen by the developers, despite their, and yes, they should hold a degree of scrutiny over that. And I think they held themselves to scrutiny over that, is, I guess, one of my main points, in fact. But I would argue also, efforts were made by the community and by the development team to be as clear about that as possible and institute, when these problems and, let's say, hazards were recognized, to institute signage, and that would pop up on the, when you were trying to complete such a purchase, there would be signage that would pop up and say, you're about to spend DEC, which is worth more. Do you still want to do this? And if you pressed yes, then of course you were making that decision fully informed. So I think all of that is the background that needs to be properly spoken into this conversation, so that it doesn't exactly mean you're wrong. I'm just trying to add context to the conversation that I think hopefully will begin to clarify that they were not trying to, you know, trick people, confuse people. In fact, they made every effort to try and clarify the issue, and so did we, the community. And then when you say that they allowed them to pay usurious rates, that's like, the implication is that Splinterlands had any sort of say over that, right? They don't. Again, on their own website, they can put up signage saying, hey, you're using dark energy crystals in a way that's going to be not helpful to yourself. And they did that as soon as they recognized that problem. But you're also looking back into a moment of time when, like, this game was on fire. The development was, like, literally barely holding things together because there was so much development. We went from 3,000 players to 400,000 daily active players. The servers were melting down. The Chaos Legion was trying to be launched. There was no new reward cards, 0 new reward cards in the game at that moment. The SPS airdrop was trying to be let out and was ongoing. Then this DEC thing, and it was like, wow, holy, what are we gonna do about this? And DEC's going shooting to the moon, and that was a problem, but it was also a positive. Remember that the dark energy crystal shooting to the moon like that attracted huge amounts of attention to this game. Why? Because due to the algorithmic inflation that the game allowed DEC to run with, when the price went higher, they printed even more. And so every day, as the price got higher and higher and higher, they printed even more every day, to the point where 300, 400, 500 DEC per victory was possible. And I've got older videos where I show some of my highest viewed videos ever, talk about how much I was making on a daily basis, like 20, 30, I think maybe even more dollars a day, just playing the game. And that was because this algorithmic inflation and the broken detachment from the DEC peg. And so that was an attraction that grabbed people's eyes and made people remember and think about Splinterlands. And so it wasn't intended. It wasn't entirely beneficial. In fact, it was, they wanted to have avoided it once they saw it. But once the cat was out of the bag, they just had to make the best of it. And they did what they could in terms of signage. So I don't agree that they did anything directly to create this problem. I do agree that they need to, I guess, they need to be careful about that in the future, if they ever do further airdrops like that. And that maybe as we look forward to the GSL airdrops, the Genesis Soccer League or whatever it's called airdrop, maybe the economy needs to be considered in that way, so we're not incentivizing holding, DEC beyond its peg or something to that effect. Because you're right, it was supposed to be a peg, they always wanted it to be a peg, and then they created a mechanism that incentivized us to break that peg. And then once that peg broke, it shattered the economy in a sense, because it's the production of DEC per battle went crazy, and that really ramped up everything, because it created a parabolic spike in the price. And so I think I've circled around the point about how they themselves didn't make you pay these high rates for the DEC that was utterly overvalued. But I do think I just want to say one more time, again, there's a difference between the market, which is the free market, Hive Engine, where you and I can buy and trade between one another, and we can pay whatever we want for whatever we want. You can sell me DEC and I can give you $1 for every DEC. If that's what we agree to in the free market, that's the price in the free market, period. It has nothing to do with Splinterlands. They couldn't stop it or quote unquote allow it. They have no control over it, period. Now, they did... Again, they fed into it through how they created that SPS airdrop, but we've talked about that. Let's move on. When they knew that DEC was utterly overvalued, not based on supply demand, yeah, that's true. It was based. The price was based on supply demand. That's the thing. Maybe you're not seeing it, but I'll tell you that the price of DEC reached crazy high heights specifically because of the laws of supply and demand. What do I mean? So DEC shot to the moon because they created a desire for it to be used, to be held, the SPS airdrop and the SPS airdrop points. And so that was the demand component, the amazing excitement demand component, the fundamental consideration that drove demand. And then then the supply is because of the algorithmic inflation of DEC, the supply is actually dictated algorithmically to counteract price fluctuation, and that so the demand component drove holding it, buying it, acquiring it, and the supply subsequently reacted. Strangely, there wasn't enough of it, though, is the thing. Because as DEC got even higher, people wanted it even more, which is the way parabolic movements usually work, right? When DEC gets to its highest prices, that's when everyone's like, oh, I need to have this. That's always the way markets work. When cryptocurrency reaches its new all-time high, that's when your mom and your uncle and your auntie were like, hey, how do I get into this stuff? That's when the masses are seeking to invest. It's not when we're in a bear market where DEC is close or below its peg, where people are talking, hey, should I buy it? And similarly with SPS and every other crypto. And so I do think that the price fluctuation that we saw and how DEC was overvalued is actually a direct result of supply and demand. The demand was us buying it and holding it for SPS airdrop points. On a non-functioning peg that would be reverted to functionality at some point. Yeah, again, I think you're kind of pointing to their personal responsibility with... Again, you said they allowed us to pay high rates for the DEC, knowing that they would correct it later. They don't have any way to disallow you. They have no control over what we do on the open market. So that's maybe a major point of disconnect that we have to touch on again. If developers want to run a successful game, it is in their interest to not allow what has happened to happen. The end result is a large group of new players that feel that they have been cheated and not received a value. No game needs that, and it is a serious blunder that should be laid at the feet of the devs. Just my opinion. So, great way to wrap it. First of all, before I go any further, I want to say I said it when I started this. Great comment. I'm going to say it again. Amazing, great, thoughtful comment. Even if I disagree with components of what you're saying, so valuable for us to kind of touch on this together, so that hopefully the community can see a thoughtful conversation over a deep and meaningful topic like this. Also, thank you for just speaking respectfully and with grace and generosity in the way because obviously you've got strong opinions, but you do so in a respectful manner. Thank you very much. if they want to run a successful game, it's in their own best interest to not let it happen. That sort of thing happen. Yeah, you're right. You're right. That was, and I said it already, that was an unintended consequence of the SPS airdrop point system and how DEC was prized within that point system. That was, I'm hesitant to say the word mistake, because mistake, again, it had positive ramifications. One of which was the excitement that was drawn around Splinterlands when people were getting $10 per win or $5 per win or something. You know, let's take a minute here. So these are some of the videos that I've created over the months that I've been attending to Splinterlands. And since August, when things really started blowing up in 2021, there are several videos here which are addressing the crazy price movement of DEC and the opportunity that represented financially for the player. And this one, $60 per day in DEC rewards. And these are not, I mean, you might say they're clickbait in the sense that it's not available to everybody. You need to have cards, you need to know how to play the game, etc. But I was earning that. That's not a fake number that I made up. I was earning that in DEC rewards playing the game in October when Dark Energy crystals were roughly 2 cents. And it's deeply meaningful to understand that these views are a reflection of the fact that this game was grabbing eyeballs at that moment, which was driving card prices, which was an opportunity for you as an investor also. Also, SPS was higher than it probably ought to have been, but for the attention that was coming from these viewers, right? And so if you were holding DEC back then, you were getting SPS, and SPS was at a higher price than it is now by a long shot. That's a positive implication that all of this, that this mistake, quote unquote mistake, led to. It led to more players, it led to more attention, it led to more price appreciation on both Dark Energy crystals as well as SPS, as well as cards. And I'm assuming that if you were holding and buying DEC at this time, you were acquiring other assets in this game and maybe playing the game. So there was opportunity there for you to have extracted value as much as there was opportunity, and there definitely was opportunity for you to lose value too. And of course, DEC, if you bought at 2 cents, you got brutalized on the DEC. But it's, the question has to come back to, where's the line in the sand for an individual to say, I didn't understand this. I mean, you even talk about in your own paragraph about how you understand that it's like buyer beware, and you also understand that that new players don't fully understand the economics, but you don't really say that in the sense of, and they should. You kind of just say like they don't, and the developers really should recognize that fact. It seems to be more your point, and you don't exactly say that, but I feel as though that's what you're driving at. Because it seems like you're really laying the responsibility. In fact, you say things like, Splinterlands allowed them to pay these rates for the high rates for DEC. They didn't do any such thing. In fact, every bit of the way they did their best to try and clearly acknowledge that the DEC was way higher than it should be. Almost every time they could. And also the community did too, myself included. And so I just don't know how to reconcile that. And of course, the developers, you're right, they shouldn't have allowed that to happen. And they do want to allow, in some sense, it was a black eye for the economy of Splinterlands. But I would argue that they were way more transparent than you seem to be implying. And that to me points to a scrupulous development team, not an unscrupulous development team. And that makes a world of difference. Additionally, they do hold responsibility, and they have worn and held their own feet to the fire on this issue. I don't know that that your comment appropriately assigns responsibility to the buyer. That's maybe where I maybe we have to agree to disagree, because I do think Splinterlands wears some of it. I think it was a mistake. But I see not even possible. I see clear examples of positive ramifications that came out of that mistake that you aren't acknowledging here. And I say, while I wish it never happened that way, it did happen that way. And now at every step of the way, the buyers of those assets need to, one, know what they're doing, and two, constantly reassess what they're doing along the way, because that if that was happening, and if you were attending to the news and to content creators, I don't think you would have been purchasing dark energy crystals at that moment. And if we go back and just quickly look at what the chart looked like at that moment, so 12 months, here we are in September of 2021, which is like August 2021 is when things were going crazy. And 0 DEC was already, let's go all. DEC is supposed to be 001. And as far as I can go back, it was 006. So 6 times its intended peg value. And that was when that's in August 10th of 2021. And it's doing one of these, and it falls back down, but it just soars right up. And people all in here were talking about how you need to hold DEC because SPS airdrops are so meaningful. And we actually made it above 2 cents. This is showing 1.6 cents. We made it above 2. But I mean, guys, this was not sustainable, and we should have known that. And it was not supposed to be that way, and we should have known that. Yes, the developers should have recognized the implications of assigning airdrop points to dark energy crystals, and I think if they had, they wouldn't have done so in the manner they did. But that's my opinion, and maybe you would disagree that they are. Maybe your conclusion is that they are foolish and that they should have seen and they didn't see, and that leaves a black eye on who they are, and you can't trust them now. Those are all important considerations and calculations for you to individually struggle with. And that's where I'm going to leave it here, guys. If this whole conversation leaves you in a place where you say to yourself that the Splinterlands developers ought to have and didn't do blank, and this is a huge black eye on them, and it makes me not trust them, then you need to stop right there and say, okay, look, one of the two foundational considerations here are broken. Because what do I always say? I say the game is fun and it has a future, but if you say they've broken your trust, or you don't think they have either the skill or the morals or the technical know-how to execute moving forward because this error happened, then that to me is you saying you don't think this game has a future. And I think you should really wrestle with that today, because if that's your conclusion, sell your assets, even for a loss, because you are afraid of where they're going. You don't trust them. And I'm not speaking to you directly, Mike. I'm not saying this is now the broader audience. If you, the audience, feel this instance of error, if that's the word we want to assign to it, was so grievous, it challenges and casts doubt upon all future decision making, that's something you need to wrestle with today, because you don't want to hold value in a system and under developers who don't have your own trust. But for me, when I look back at this, I see a time of development where there was a minuscule team wrestling with an insane amount of growth. They couldn't possibly keep up with even server growth, let alone the SPS airdrop launch, the Chaos Legion launch, and so much more, that overlooking this one issue and in the end how they handle this one issue doesn't point to distrust, but it actually points to me to humans doing their best and in a transparent manner, which for me is so much more important than the unfair and unrealistic request that they never make mistakes. because we all make mistakes. But if you make a mistake and then you move forward, denying it or refusing to, I guess, address it or try and make it as better as you can, to correct it as best you can, then that's a problem. But that's not what I saw here. And so, Mike, thanks so much for the comment. Thanks so much for the great conversation. I sincerely appreciate it. And I hope that our audience does too, because I think this is a deeply meaningful issue. And it might be one that breaks your back in this place and says, nope, can't trust them. If it is, recognize that now and don't try and build on that foundation because you have distrust. I do not. I am deeply invested in the game because I continue to believe that even this points to developing a development team that is conscious of their own fallibleness, their own ability to make mistakes, and transparent and responsible in context where they do make mistakes. That's what I saw here. And so this grows confidence, even though it was a misstep. And there were going to be a million more decisions. If we're lucky, this game will persist for many years, and there will be more moments like this where we have to look back and say, was that a deal breaker? But this one for me wasn't. The question is it for you? Thanks, guys, for your time and attention. Have an amazing day. God bless.